We have a whole hour of information about the storm, the recovery, and the damage that's been caused by the multiple atmospheric rivers. We are going to be speaking shortly with someone from Cal OES, the Emergency Services Office. We'll be speaking with local officials about what's happening in local communities, and we'll hear a weather forecast as well for the weekend, round 3. So batten down and keep it tuned to 90.7 FM K-Squid and put on your raincoat. Taking a look at the weather forecast for the Monterey Bay Area right now at the top of the hour, there is a flood watch issued by the National Weather Service starting with Friday evening into Saturday morning, all the way through Monday afternoon. And there will be flooding caused by excessive rainfall. The entire Bay Area and Central Coast are included, including Monterey and San Benito counties. This is going to start in earnest on Saturday morning and run all the way through Monday afternoon. The impacts will be excessive runoff, resulting in flooding of rivers, creeks, and streams, and these may rise out of their banks. Today was a great day for cleanup and recovery as many roads opened and trees were removed. Many people had power restored. However, there is another storm approaching, and right now they're calling for an inch of rain to fall on Friday, Saturday another inch, Sunday another inch, and then 3/4 of an inch on Monday. So that's pretty heavy for the lowlands, and that's not actually taking into account the upper elevations, which could see twice that amount. So you know the drill. And to talk about the statewide impacts, we're very happy to welcome Bryan May. So let me get him up. Hi, Bryan. Thanks for joining us here on K-Squid.
Good evening. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I bet you're a busy guy. You are the communications director for the state of California's Office of Emergency Services. I thought we'd start by having you give us an overview of some of the damages that the state has endured over this, I don't know, what period? I guess 2-week period now since New Year's?
It's been a minute, hasn't it?
Long minute.
Yeah, I think, we certainly are no stranger to seeing major disasters in the state of California, but normally when we do see them, if it's an earthquake, it's isolated to the epicenter. If it's a wildfire, it's usually 1, maybe 2 counties, but that's where this one has presented challenges, and that we've seen really damage and destruction up and down the state, from the southern border of San Diego all the way up to the Oregon coast. I think 41 counties have been included in the federal declaration of emergency that we've got right now. And it's challenging to respond to. It's every community that's been impacted and affected needs assistance in some way or another. And our job here at the Governor's Office of Emergency Services is just trying to coordinate with the local communities. What are the unmet needs? And then try and make sure that we can get resources there as quick as possible. Also dealing with the challenging conditions and keeping our first responders as safe as possible while they're trying to not only rescue, but get people back to a semi-normalcy.
And Bryan, we're having a little bit of audio difficulty right now, so I'm going to have you call us, and we'll use the old-fashioned phone system. So if you can call 831-900-5773, or Manira can call you. We're going to do a little redux here with your phone line so that we can hear you better. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, if you got that number, go ahead and call us, and we'll get you right back on. All right, and as we were mentioning earlier, there is a flood watch, so keep that in mind. That means people in low-lying areas near rivers need to be aware. They are taking a hard look at the Salinas River and the Pajaro rivers right now, so that's something to keep track of. Let's see if we can get him back on the line here. Hey, Bryan, are you with us?
My apologies. Hopefully this sounds better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So can you give us an estimate of the dollar figure, perhaps? I know it's preliminary because you haven't even been able to assess all the damage, but is there a dollar figure preliminary that we're looking at in terms of the state of California incurring?
I have not seen a dollar figure, and I can tell you that we're in that time period now where we're working with FEMA to make sure that we get refunded as much as possible and help people. So I think the state and every county reporting to us has been a little hesitant at this point to put a number on it so that we don't go too low and a month from now, a month and a half from now, realize that it's significantly more than that. So that information is still being collected as quick as possible, but it's going to be substantial up and down the state of California. It's going to be a big number.
No doubt. As far as I know, a declaration of an emergency does loosen the purse strings, and Governor Newsom was here in Santa Cruz County a couple of days ago touring the damage at Capitola, and he said, that he was going to do everything he could for Santa Cruz County. Can you tell us a little bit about the mechanism in case the public is not familiar with these disaster declarations, how that works with funding?
It's not only funding, but it's far-reaching to the point where, like, trying to get commodities, and when I say commodities, it could be anything from bottled water to pallets of cots and stuff. Sometimes those transportation laws get hung up and you can't bring trucks in because they're out of time. So by signing a federal declaration of emergency, it not only does it provide funding, and it us at the state level to work with FEMA and the locals, but it also it cuts through red tape. So trucks aren't sitting at the border of Oregon or Nevada saying we can't get into the state because we're past our driving time for the day. It cuts through a lot of red tape and allows everyone to operate on this is an emergency situation. Let's just cut all the bureaucracy out and get stuff done as quick as possible.
From what I understand, Governor Newsom said that when he called the Biden administration, the first word was yes, before he had even asked for a disaster declaration to be given. That's a nice response to get. No punishing California for being on the wrong side of the aisle or anything like that. It's great to see, just compassion immediately offered from the federal government, and it has not always been the case. Depending on which side you vote. It's nice to get that out of the way and just look at us as suffering all alike, no matter how you vote, right? Everybody's in the same storm.
It always sounds good when you can say emergencies cut through politics. It's really nice to say it's actually that is the case and that is happening. And to prove your point even further, the FEMA administrator, that FEMA breaks up the country into different regions. And so we in California are included in Region 9. And Bob Fenton is the regional administrator of FEMA Region 9. He has been here at the State Operations Center for the last couple of days. This evening, even as we speak, the national administrator of FEMA, Diane Criswell, is flying into Sacramento. Will be here tomorrow at the State Operations Center and then going out and touring some of the damaged areas. I'm not sure exactly of her itinerary, but she will be in the state for the next couple of days. And again, it just furthers that example of we are working with the White House in every step to try and make sure that we help people get through this as quick as possible.
That's great to hear. I don't know how Santa Cruz County compares with other areas that were hit, but it feels and looks like we got the brunt of it. Is that your understanding as well?
I know the coastal communities, by and large, have been heavily impacted, and I will say, this is certainly one of those badges you don't want to wear, but you're absolutely right, and that Santa Cruz and that area has been hit hard. The devastation is hard to look at times, but that's the reason that you saw the governor in earlier. That's the reason that the FEMA administrator is coming in to make sure that there's literally a boots on the ground and eyes on the problem so that we can try and get through this as quick as possible.
So what can local residents expect in terms of a statewide presence? What should they look for? For example, our Seacliff State Beach took a huge hit. It was completely just, big parts of it were destroyed, the pier, the basic structures that were there. What should people familiar with these beloved places look for in the weeks to come in terms of recovery?
Well, and it's the hardest thing to say right now, but the first thing is because we still have more storms coming in, patience is going to have to continue to be on all of our minds. We don't want to put people in harm's way as they're trying to clean up or recover with more systems coming in. As soon as we can start getting through these final round or two of systems, you should and will see cleanup efforts beginning as quick as possible. With that in mind, and again, when I mentioned patience, we've got cleanup up and down the state. And it's not only from a state level, but it's from your local utilities. It's from Caltrans, who's got every available crew and outside assets coming in. We're all trying to respond as we're throwing everything we've got at it to try and get through this and get people, again, back to where they can go to these parks that you love so much and are used to seeing.
Absolutely. Do you have any stories for us about what you've seen? I imagine part of your job is just to be on the phone like this, talking to the media, but what are some stories that you have seen in terms of the kind of level of damage we're talking about across the state?
I will be honest, the State Emergency Operations Center is just outside of Sacramento and on the edge of what used to be Mather Air Force Base, and I have practically lived here since New Year's Eve. So I haven't been one of the ones that have been out in the boots on the ground in the field, but I know we're getting images in, and even the things that the size of the sinkholes that we're seeing up and down the state, the mudslides and debris flows. And I was talking to one of the state meteorologists yesterday, and the rains are going to stop in the next several days, but the potential for these mudslides could last another 6 months, 8 months to a year. Because there's so much water in the ground and things have kind of loosened, and there are these slow-moving mudslides that can suddenly turn quickly. So, again, I don't want to seem doom and gloom, but the potential for more problems and issues, even after the rains slow down a bit and we turn these faucets off, is still going to be there for a while.
I was going to ask you, as a survivor of the CZU fires, and many of my neighbors lost property. This is certainly compounded by the fires. How much of what was declared an emergency then might actually be leftover money that would help this recovery? Because they're sort of not connected. In other words, this debris flows are coming out of the burn scar in a big part of this area and clogging up streams and making them more prone to flooding. So is there any funding that came in during the CZU fires that might be available now for people who have lost homes through mudslides and debris flows?
That's a question probably better suited for my counterparts at FEMA, since they're more of the funding mechanism. Right now, I would just say from a state level, we're fully focused on response and recovery. But I know that FEMA looks at every incident and sees how they're tied together. And you're right, the CZU fire, I was up there the day after that fire and a couple of times afterwards and saw the damage and the devastation and the beautiful park up there as well. And I know that their funding can be tied together, because you're right, there's a reason that mudslides are happening in these burn scar areas, and it is directly as a result of what happened with that fire when it tore through.
And what is under the state control are the state parks, of which we have very many in our community, including the one you just mentioned, Big Basin State Park. And a lot of that Boulder Creek area right below there has experienced flooding and mudslides and stuff. Just before I let you go, I know you're a busy guy. I really appreciate the time you're taking to talk to our listeners here on the Central Coast. Speaking with Bryan May, the Communications Director for the Cal Office of Emergency Services statewide. And he's got a big plate full of problems to look at. We have lost some people, haven't we, during this couple of storms that came through?
That's the hardest question to hear and the hardest question to answer. The death toll at this moment that I've seen is 18. There are still people missing that aren't included in that number, and that number is likely to go up. If to put that into perspective, if this were a wildfire, this would be the 5th deadliest wildfire in California history. We haven't seen 18 fatalities from flooding in this state in a very long time. We also haven't seen the type of flooding that we're seeing in this state in a very long time. The number that I saw earlier this week from the Department of Water Resources, their estimates is this storm system from the start back, say, on New Year's Eve when we started getting hit, or after Christmas until now, is dropping. The number that I saw was 22 trillion gallons of water on the state of California, and that's enough to cover the entire state in 15 inches of water. It's deadly. And again, we're not out of the woods yet. We need people to continue to be alert. We need people to understand that if a road, it may look like it only has a little bit of water crossing the road, but don't drive across roads when they're covered in water. Be safe. Check on your neighbors, especially those who may be vulnerable, or the older community. Check on them, make sure that they're safe and doing okay and have what they need. This is a time we need to step up and look out for one another. And but you're right, that number of 18 is a hard number to hear and see.
I'm really sorry to hear that it's such a large number. And are most of those fatalities people who fell into flooding waters, or is it a variable kind of accident that happened?
To be honest, it is multiple ways, but the majority didn't go into water. The majority had trees falling on them. The winds that we've seen, we talk about the cliche of a perfect storm, but it's not just that water amount that I mentioned, but the winds that we've had that have come through, very isolated at times, but when they've been peaking, the saturated ground and that type of wind, we just don't have trees that can withstand that over long periods of time like what we're seeing. So a lot of the fatalities have been because of trees have come down. We have seen fatalities because people drove either around barriers or across water, and it just takes a little bit of water across the roadway to start moving your car. And then once that happens, you don't have control over it, and things get very dangerous very quickly.
Well, that's a good cautionary tale to end on, which is, don't take unnecessary risks just to get to work unless there's an absolute life-threatening emergency, because you don't want to end up in that number. Well, thank you so much, Bryan. I appreciate you taking the time. Good luck with keeping us all informed, and maybe we'll do another show next week if there's more news to report. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me on and for all the work that you guys are doing to get that message out to your public as well.
That's what we're here for. We are community radio, and that goes all the way down the line to keeping folks informed on the micro and macro levels. So thanks for being the state voice right now. Appreciate it so much.
My pleasure. Good talking with you.
You too. Bye-bye. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. This is Talk of the Bay. Thanks for listening tonight. We are so happy to have you on board, and we have been doing what we can to keep you informed. I have been blocked in without power or electricity or cell phone, but we just got unblocked the past couple of days. We can get out. We can get internet. I live up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and there have been many stories to tell about people surviving with trees coming through their roofs. There was an 8-month-old baby that the tree came within 10 inches of its head, but it stopped right there. Several stories like that where trees came crashing through and just missed people. But of course, what we just heard from Bryan was a different story. So yeah, be careful out there is the bottom line. We're going to be switching gears in just a moment and talking with Elaine, who is with the NAACP and has some really exciting things happening on the holiday coming up on Monday. Hi, Elaine. Thank you for joining me here on Talk of the Bay.
Oh, you're so very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So what a celebration. We're so happy that we have this to celebrate and the day off. Tell us what's planned by the NAACP for this rainy coming up long weekend. It looks like Monday might be less rainy. So tell us more.
Yes, well, we had the MLK Youth Day scheduled for Saturday, the 14th, but due to the weather, that has been postponed and moved out to January 28th, so mark your calendar. And then Monday, we're going to have the MLK March, meeting at Cathcart and walking down Pacific Avenue, marching down Pacific Avenue, and heading into the Civic for commemorative services. And we have a list of speakers that will be there to support the event. So we're
Wonderful.
Very excited about that.
Do you want to give us some hint about some of the speakers that you have invited?
So we have Mayor Fred Keeley. We have newly elected Supervisor Justin Cummings. We have Dr. David Anthony from UCSC. Tammy Brown is going to bless us with some of her music, amazing music that she has. Her vocals is just so touching. We have Rabbi Torla who will be speaking, and a few other people. So we hope you come on down.
That sounds fantastic. And, tell us about the enduring legacy and why it's so important to honor Dr. King every year during this time, and not just once a year even.
Well, Dr. King, he said, we live each day, right? We interact with each other each day. And so the legacy that Martin Luther King instilled in us is to, love thy neighbor as you love thyself. And so what a gift that on MLK's birthday that we get to celebrate not just the man, the person, but what he stood for, what he was rooted and grounded right? And so, coming together on Monday in the community, it's all about community. MLK was really big on community and healing and bringing about wholeness for all. And so, we strive to be that way in life on a daily basis. And on Monday, we get to elevate that. We get to elevate that in honor of Martin Luther King, but we get to elevate that within each other. I'm really excited.
It sounds like a great event. And, we are in such an interesting moment in our history. In some ways, there's been so much progress, and in other ways, it feels like we're being dragged back to before the civil rights movement changed so much about voting rights and access to the political sphere and safety. Does it feel, like this is even more important today to you to remember his message?
Absolutely, because if anybody, if you were living during those times, or you were educated on it in schools, or if you were educated on it, in the quote unquote street. I'm a New Yorker myself, living here in Santa Cruz, California now. What we got to learn and what we got to see and witness is, to continue to love thy neighbor, even in the midst of the fear and the anger and the harm that may be caused by others, to show up in our hearts with forgiveness. Now, am I saying that what people do is right? No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, I know for me personally, my father raised me where he says, if people are hurting, right? And when people hurt, they lash out. So, we can come with forgiveness in our hearts. And how can we support each other? People who are in pain and use that pain to harm others. How can we support each other, especially during these times, to come together, to lay the burdens down, to lay the narratives down, and just love one another?
It is such a simple and yet so powerful message, and so important, because we're in this time, where social media is just stoking division and causing people to feel under attack. And I loved what you said about just laying your burden down for a while to feel in community. It's as important as fighting the good fight, isn't it? Just to feel like you can be among friends who understand this radical but so simple vision of love thy neighbor. That's an important message.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, because at the end of the day, hurting and harming someone with your words or with your deeds or with the hand, as they say, it's not going to serve anybody. It's not going to serve anybody. So we continue to show up, hold that space, lift people up, and and even if you're at odds with somebody, it's okay to honor that. It's okay to quote unquote be at odds, but also come in your heart of wanting to reconcile. Reconciliation. It's about reconciliation. And as you mentioned with the social media and stuff, there is so much divisiveness. And a lot of it I noticed, I was just sharing with someone in the meeting, it's all narrative. And if we're willing to just be willing to hear something other than our side, then you know what? There won't be no side. There'll just be two people having a conversation. And that's one of the things I pray and hope and pray for the community here in Santa Cruz County and beyond to put, see no sides. Just see two people, three people, a group of people coming together for the common good and bring about a healthy result.
And it's got to feel good to see the historic win of Justin Cummings, the first supervisor ever in Santa Cruz County of color.
Yes.
A man of color getting elected is something to see for the first time. So there's some firsts here to celebrate, and he will be one of the speakers. Yeah, fantastic. Well, I know you have an important meeting. This is the hard work behind the scenes that I know that organizations do, and the NAACP's been there this whole time doing it. So I want to hats off to you for all the organizing you do behind the scenes and taking time when you have a meeting coming in a couple minutes to talk to our listeners and invite them to the event. I really appreciate it, Elaine. Thank you.
Oh, no worries. And you know, it takes a village. You know, I don't do this by myself. Actually, President Brenda Griffin, who just completed her term, and I stepped in, she did most of this work. I can't take credit for that. I got to give her a shout out. And Amanda and everybody else who has stepped into this. I kind of came in toward the tail end and going to pick up the baton from her as I step into the role as the president of NAACP. But you know what? No matter what it is, Rachel, it takes a village. And thank God we have a village that we could tap into.
Absolutely. And we are your village outlet here at K-Squid. So lean on us to get the word out anytime. We're here for that. So thank you for letting our listeners know what's happening on Monday, and looking forward to it very much.
Looking forward to seeing everyone as well.
All right. You take care. Stay dry.
You as well. Be well. Stay safe.
Bye-bye. All right. This is KSQD Santa Cruz, and I'm very happy to be here at Talk of the Bay, KSQD 90.7 FM. We are your community radio station. Tony Rosamano has a report for us. He writes that the weather is not going to be too bad tonight and Friday, although there are flood watches going into effect Saturday through Monday. We will get a brief period of rain and wind Saturday, followed by a lull, then another storm coming in Sunday through Monday afternoon. The good news, and there is some, the end is nigh, meaning the National Weather Service says dry high pressure will rebuild into the next weekend. That means La Nina climate pattern is expected to reestablish itself, greater chances of wet weather north of us, greater chances of dry weather south of us. For us, it's going to be a toss-up, but the coin seems to be landing on greater chances of drier rather than wetter, at least looking ahead the next 14 days. So if you never thought you'd hear someone say La Nina is good news, you heard it first. And maybe welcome to global warming and weather extremes. That's kind of our new reality. Coming up in just a moment, we'll be speaking with Jason Hoppin of the County of Santa Cruz. And he's got news for us about what's going on locally. So thanks, Jason, for making some time.
Nice to talk to you, Rachel.
Good to talk to you, too. So we heard a little interview there from our Cal OES representative, who has your job, but on the state level, told us that they don't really have financial estimates for damage. And I was going to ask you, it's probably too early yet, but do you have any numbers, any numbers at all for us?
I can give you a couple numbers, but these numbers are old and these numbers are not real numbers anymore. But prior to the big blast that we took over the weekend on, I believe it was the 8th, we had about $22 million in road damage to county infrastructure, and then another almost $7 million to parks. But I want to caution the listeners that this is just damage to county public property. So this does not include damage to the cities. This does not include damage to water districts. And I know there's damage to water districts. For example, SLV Water District has damage to their system. It does not include damage to state parks. Obviously, there's damage to state parks. Everybody's seen the pictures of the pier at Seacliff and what's going on out there. In fact, there's some concern about another round of large surf moving in and what that's going to do to the coast. And it doesn't include damage to private property. Obviously, there's been a lot of damage to private property throughout the county.
And how is that going to be tallied? I know people have to talk to their insurance companies and all that, but does the county go out and assess private property damage as well?
So as the county, as the lead for the emergency response in the county will collect the damages from our public partners who may have FEMA claims once there is a federal disaster declaration. But I don't believe there is a comprehensive tally of damage to private property. That's just not something that we generally do.
Right. So that would have to come from maybe California insurance agencies or something, tallying all that up and reporting back.
Yeah, and that's obviously an emerging situation because, we are, well, it looks, I've seen sun in the forecast, which is heartening, but there's still a couple more rounds of rain over the weekend that we're going to take. So that will, whatever we're seeing already may increase.
Yeah, exactly. So where are the county's priorities right now as far as their response?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We had a little bit of a lull. In fact, I can see kind of the dying light through the clouds outside our window at the Emergency Operations Center here. So what our crews are really focused on is trying to get access to people that are cut off, and there are still people that are cut off in neighborhoods. I know this is a situation both in Lompico and Corlitos and different spots here and there in the valley. There's probably a few dozen people that are having trouble getting out. So they're focusing on that kind of urgent situation. The other thing they want to focus on is really taking a look at our creeks and rivers, because flooding has been such an issue and the ground is saturated. It doesn't take much rain for flooding to become an issue again. So we want to make sure that there's no blockages in the creeks and streams that are going to cause significant problems when it comes to neighborhood access and things like that. Obviously, the county has a policy to leave woody debris in creeks if it's not creating an urgent emergency situation, because that's good habitat for fish and other wildlife. But we had a situation, for example, before the big blast that we took over the weekend, where there was a big root ball blocking, just to give you an example, blocking Lompico Creek. And your listeners know that if you've been up into Lompico, that road runs right along that creek. And if that were to create a dam, the water would not only overtop the road and make it impassable, but it could undermine the road and cause it to slip out completely, which would be a long-term problem, obviously, for everybody that lives up there. So they went into the creek bed and got those root balls out of the creek bed so that they could have the creek flowing as much as possible when the rain did come. So those are the kind of things that we're going to take this very short break to do. I mean, we can only deal with the most urgent things given the amount of time that we have. And so that's the kind of thing they're doing today. We've actually flown drones along creeks and rivers to try to look for those kinds of issues before. It appeared to play a role in the first round of Soquel Creek flooding. There were several blockages that we identified that may have released and caused a sudden rush of water into that area. So that's the stuff we're looking at, and again, trying to make sure people have access to get out if they are blocked.
And is there any organized funding source for people who need help with cleanup or recovery as we look ahead past this couple of storms that we see coming?
So we have a lot of resources on the web. We've created a page for the storm incident. So if you just go to santacruzcounty.us, there's a big red banner at the top of that page. And if you go there and click on it, there's some resources not only for what's going on now, but for our recovery efforts as we go forward. And there's some information on there for people on, what to do to when you're returning to your property after a flood, assistance with insurance claims, how to document stuff for your insurer, where to go in case you're having trouble with your insurance company. United Policyholders is a great resource, and everybody, I think, who's been through the CZU fire has probably contacted them at one point or another for help with their insurance claims. And we're going to add to that page as we go along. There's tips on how to document damage with photos and videos, and salvaging water damaged goods, and just general safety information about your property, right? Obviously, if you come back and you smell gas, that's obviously a warning sign. If you see lines down or you see signs of the foundation having moved or the earth having moved, all of those are red flags, and you should probably call public safety for some assistance in those cases. But we are looking at ways to support neighborhoods with cleanup. Nothing specific to announce yet, since this is obviously we've got hundreds of people working on emergency response, and we're just not through this round of storms yet.
Yeah, it's a little premature. I had to ask a difficult question of our previous guest, whose statewide numbers were over 18 deaths in this series, and I was wondering if you had any statistics about Santa Cruz County in particular.
Yeah, well, we had the one unfortunate incident, I think, in the very first storm that blew through, where the gentleman who was walking in Lighthouse Field was killed by a falling tree. I am amazed, frankly, that we have not had additional deaths or serious injuries. I have not heard of. I am sure people have been injured. We got a call from our 911 dispatch center the other night when we were having that serious bout of wind because there were so many reports of trees into houses that they gave us a heads up. But I have not heard of major or serious, or certainly not deaths, of course, but any even major injuries. I'm sure there have been injuries when you have this many trees coming down or in a populated area. That's bound to happen. But I am just shocked given the amount of damage that we're seeing and the number of trees coming down because the ground is so saturated that it hasn't been more significant. So I think that's something that we can all knock on wood about. I'm very heartened and surprised, happily surprised by that.
We heard a couple of stories like that where people were in their homes and the tree came right through the living room and they were feet away, but they didn't get squished. Some babies, in their cribs that had the tree come within 8 inches of them. So a lot of stories that, just hair raising. And imagine,
Yeah, I've seen pictures of trees that if it fell one way and if it had fallen another way, things could have been much worse. I mean,
it's just a luck of the draw. And those very high winds seem to have taken off perfectly healthy trees, like the whole top of a redwood tree near me came blasting off into the ground. And it was perfectly healthy because of this big pulse of wind that came through. Well, everybody stay safe. Jason, thank you for keeping us informed. We'll probably check back in with you sometime next week after this latest series comes through and see how we're doing out the other side. So thanks so much.
If I can mention one thing real quick, Community Bridges is doing a flood recovery info session up at Mountain Community Resources Center tomorrow at 4:30 for anybody that wants to go. So that's a great resource for people.
And we'll also keep people updated on our website, and you'll have your website up. So if you can't access that, listen to the radio. Get some batteries. So thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you. Stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too. KSQD, Santa Cruz, 90.7 FM. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. This is your community radio station, taking a look at recent and future storms. And we have with us a scientist from UC Santa Cruz, Michael Loik, who's going to be joining us. Hi, Michael.
Hi. Hello. How are you?
I'm wonderfully okay.
Good.
Now that I have electricity, which took about 4 days this time. There was several bouts of 4 days off and a lot of generator use. But I'm glad to talk to you because you have an expertise in things like atmospheric rivers and how extreme weather might be driven by the warming climate. What are you noticing, and how does this look to you from your science lens today?
Well, it reminds me of a number of things. And first of all, one of the things that I tell all of our students is that warmer air has this fundamental physical property, which is that it holds more water vapor than colder, relatively cooler air, which means that everywhere around the planet that's warming up, there's greater evaporation occurring. And so even in the absence of a change in rainfall or snowfall patterns, warmer temperatures mean greater evaporation. And sometimes this is referred to as climatic water deficit, which is the enhanced evaporation that comes with warmer temperatures. In any case, when that water goes up, of course, it's got to come down somewhere. And here in California, the water doesn't usually come down in a very regular pattern. It comes down in a highly seasonal manner from basically October to April or May. And whereas years or decades ago, we used to think about a normal rainfall year in California, it's become highly polarized where many of our recent winters have been rather dry and below average in terms of total precipitation. And then years like this year, and some of your listeners might remember 2017 was also a pretty heavy rainfall year. And so our rainfall is very episodic, and we kind of live in a permanent state of drought that every once in a while is alleviated by an extremely wet year. We go from drought to deluge. And some of your listeners may have heard the term whiplash weather. And so a lot of times that rainfall is directed to the north of us by a persistent high pressure system that sits out over the Pacific Ocean. And for reasons we don't fully understand, that persistent high pressure system has kind of moved elsewhere and allowed the so-called storm door to be open, which allows these atmospheric rivers to continue to arrive on the West Coast. Now, my understanding is that there may be a high-pressure system that sets up again next week. I think the 19th is supposed to be our last drizzly day before we get a drier spell.
Well, there was just an article in the Washington Post today about atmospheric rivers, and I don't know if you had a chance to read it yet, but it was talking about how there is, with every degree or 1.8 degree Fahrenheit increase in the temperature of the atmosphere, you get a percentage increase of intensity. So this article just came out. It's written by Kasha Patel. And it says that atmospheric rivers are projected to become more intense, wetter, and larger as temperatures rise. That's not great news for the Central Coast, is it?
Well, it may not be, and but it's certainly consistent with the idea that what evaporates, what water vapor goes up in the atmosphere has to come back down somewhere, and atmospheric rivers, this is a term that we've sort of heard more about recently, but they've always been out there. We used to call them the Pineapple Express, but they're really important. One of the major pathways for water transport, water vapor and heat energy transport from the tropics to the temperate zones. So most of the rainfall that gets distributed actually, as we've been finding out, comes in the form of these large features in the atmosphere.
Right, and as you said, they're a natural feature, but with climate change, they're getting more intense and more destructive. If only we could capture some of this water that's flowing out to sea. That is always the refrain. This article implies that our entire infrastructure, where we rely on the snowpack to feed, our systems throughout the year, is built on an old planet's temperature.
Yeah, excuse me. That may in fact be the case, and we've certainly seen things like that when it comes to the allocation of water in the Lower Colorado River Basin, where allocation patterns were done. Allocation numbers were done in years of very high rain and snowfall. So warm up the atmosphere, you get more evaporation, and it's the next step from that is a stronger, more intense storm that's bringing that water back down to the ground.
So tell me what you're working on now, and whether, there's something in that might inform us about what's happening right now.
Well, one of the projects that I've been working on is to think about snow-covered habitat in mountains like the Sierra and the Rocky Mountains and other places. And there's many organisms that require snow for either habitat for insulation, such as high elevation American pikas that are small mammals that stay active year round, and they need that snow cover in the winter for insulation. For many organisms, the snowpack is a resource. It's water when the snow melts in the springtime. And so there are many species that are relying upon snowpack. And if you think about the snow, at least in years that are not like this year, where there's less and less snowpack, then those snow reliant species will have some conservation concerns because their habitat will be shrinking. They'll basically try to, or need to, or be compelled to move to higher elevations to remain consistent with the shrinking snowpack.
And those pikas are incredibly cute. If you've never seen one, listeners, they look like a miniature rabbit with tiny little round ears, and they emit a very high-pitched squeak. So that's how you know they're around. I remember seeing them in the High Sierra. And what you're saying is they have to move, or are they already moving? higher?
Yes, there's some evidence that some species or some populations, have moved higher, or else the lower elevations species have disappeared.
That's really sad because that's an important species for the whole ecosystem in the High Sierra. And
Yeah.
they perform important plant distribution services, as well as just having the right to exist all by themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're also food for predators, so they play a role in the community like that as well.
Yeah. And so I have friends that went skiing or tried to go skiing over the storm, and they found themselves getting rained on. Is that going to be a more typical experience for people who love the snow?
Well, that's actually part of the story with the snow lines moving to higher elevations, is that particularly for the Sierra Nevada and the Cascades that are closer to the Pacific Ocean than, say, for example, the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains are an interior mountain chain, farther away from the oceans, and oceans act as a excellent heat sink because of the thermal capacity of water. And so the Sierra and Cascades sit closer to the freezing point than do the Rocky Mountains because they're further inland where it's colder. And so our coastal ranges will be more vulnerable to a snow to rain shift. If you think about at a certain elevation, if it was historically snowing in a warmer climate, it may be raining instead. And so that kind of a transition would be what would eat away at the lower limits of the snowpack. And one of the critical things that can happen when snow falls when rain falls on an existing snowpack is that it can rapidly melt the snowpack and lead to important flooding consequences downstream.
Isn't that what happened during the Oroville Dam near failure? The spillway failed?
Yeah, I think that was an example of a very similar situation to that. And it's actually because of the heat content of the water vapor. It's not the raindrops itself, but the high humidity that comes along with rainfall, then the heat content in the water vapor that actually melts the snowpack rapidly.
It's like a big blow dryer, huh? With lots of
a big wet dryer.
A wet dryer, right, that melts the snow.
Yeah.
And we have seen, in the past that these Sierra rivers come roaring down the mountain in very fast form and end up in these reservoirs, which normally would be good news. But when it happens all at once, they're not ready for it, so they have to release it. And I think that's why the spillway failed, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know enough about that particular situation, but I know that in the management of our reservoirs, there's a certain amount of capacity that is held for flood control, and there's a certain amount of the capacity that is held back for filling from the snow melt. So the people who manage the reservoirs they're juggling a couple of needs at this point in time, which is to make sure that the downstream communities are not being flooded, but also allowing volume to be left in the reservoir to capture the melt later this spring and summer.
I think a lot of us are confused by El Nino and La Nina. We're in a La Nina pattern, I understand, and that means in the central coast we could either be much wetter or much drier. Right now it seems like much wetter is the answer, but is it possible for the tap to just turn off the rest of the winter?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of it. Perhaps your listeners are hearing a lot of different people on radio and TV talking about what's going on. And for most of us who pay attention to this, that is a major concern. We just have to think back to last year. Last year started off November, December were quite wet. And then in January, it didn't rain at all. The so-called tap turned off. And that was it for pretty much the rest of the season. And that's always a possibility. There's a saying that that current performance is not an indicator of future success or something to that effect. And that is definitely the case with rainfall. So a wet fall or a wet early part of the winter is not at all correlated and cannot at all be used to say with any kind of certainty that this is going to continue or that we're going to have a wet second half of the winter.
And I'm speaking with Michael Loik. He's UC Santa Cruz Associate Professor of Environmental Studies and kind enough to join us here on Talk of the Bay on K-Squid. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. In the time left, I was wondering what a California that actually adapted to these sudden influxes of water might look like if it were to capitalize on the water when it does fall.
Right. Well, one of my good friends and colleagues here at UC Santa Cruz is Professor Andrew Fisher, who's very well known for his work on something called managed recharge or managed aquifer recharge, which is basically taking old farm fields and other kinds of habitats and repurposing them to allow excess rainwater to sit on these fields and to basically soak into the ground and recharge the groundwater. So California, of course, relies on reservoirs and snowmelt to capture the Sierra Nevada snowmelt. We also rely on water that comes down the Colorado River. And what those don't make up for our supply, then we pump groundwater from underground. And one of the problems with that is that we pump groundwater much faster than water will soak back into the ground to replenish the groundwater. And it's kind of like a bank account where we're chipping away at the principal when we should probably just be using the interest. So allowing spaces for water to soak back into the ground is one approach for that. And it turns out that, a lot of our infrastructure is just not designed for catching rapidly flowing runoff. And the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of that rapidly flowing runoff, particularly in urban regions, is going to be highly contaminated. And so once you've caught that water, if we were to, engineer things for a lot more capture of rainwater like this year, there would have to be a lot of secondary and perhaps even tertiary, quaternary treatment of that water to make sure it was okay to use for either domestic use or for non-potable use for, say, irrigation or something like that.
Yeah, I've even heard of stories where they're pumping it underground. Somewhere in Watsonville, there's a recharge where they're putting it back into the aquifer. Have you heard
Absolutely.
of that?
Yes, absolutely. So there are some different approaches, some that utilize gravity and that are selected for certain kinds of soils, certain kinds of locations where the soil is amenable for that infiltration of that standing water. And in some cases, as you noted, where it's being pumped below ground actively.
Right. And Santa Cruz County, most people know this, is not part of the statewide water system. In other words, Sierra snowmelt does not do us any good. Is that correct?
That is correct. Historically, our rainfall patterns have always been enough to supply our region with both surface water from Loch Lomond and some groundwater pumping from a number of locations around the county.
Right. Well, let's hope that we learn how to make the best of a wet situation. Right now, we just got to hunker down starting with Saturday morning through Monday and maybe look for the light at the end of the atmospheric tunnel.
That's right. January 19th, I believe, is going to be the last day of the big wet.
All right. That's a week from today, folks. So hang in there. Michael, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I know you traveled and made it here, so thank you for being here. I hope we can call on you again in the future.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Okay. Have a great night. Stay safe.
You too.
Bye-bye. This is Talk of the Bay. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. That was Michael Loik, Professor of Environmental Studies at UC Santa Cruz. And coming up at 6 o'clock, right after First Person Singular, it's Gary Shapiro with From the Bookshelf, a long-running series presented with great conversations with best-selling authors, artists, performers, and historians. This week's guest is Charles Elton, the author of Cimino, the Deer Hunter, Heaven's Gate, and The Price of Vision. Michael Cimino was a controversial director whose film The Deer Hunter won the Oscar for Best Picture. His follow-up, Heaven's Gate, was castigated as the worst, most extravagant film in history. We'll find out how that conversation goes in just a moment with Gary Shapiro here on KSQD Santa Cruz 90.7 FM. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. I'll see you again next Thursday. Stay safe, stay dry, and take care of each other. Here's First Person Singular coming up next.